Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to SOBA Live. I am T. Priester, co-founder of SOBA, president of Core Financial.
I am Shay Norman, co-founder of SOBA and the founder of the Bridge Financial Accountability Coaching Company. And I never mentioned United Healthcare. Y'all know I'm down with United Healthcare on the Medicare side.
Yeah. And we got a third party in today. Montoya's been with us a couple of times, so we just brought him straight into the stream. At this point, he's a regular. Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. What's going on, my brother?
Hey, what's going on? Glad to be back. Yes, I am the curator of the Mental Dialogue Community Club and a member of SOBA. Glad to be a part of what y'all are doing here. Glad to be back, King and Queen.
Nah, appreciate it. So this morning, guys, we're going to pivot a little bit, right? Shay and I had a show planned, but based on some conversations that came up throughout the week, we decided to do a little something different. So, you know, we always have industry news, but we also deal with issues that are relevant to our culture, right? So you guys know I just came back from Puerto Rico, and before I left, I shared how having this COVID test was stressing me out, right? Because before you plan this trip, I had to have a negative test within a 72-hour window, right? So you can't take the test that comes back the same day. You have to take Montoya, you just had some, so there's two tests. There's the PCR is the one
test, the regular. Takes some days to come back, and then the rapid test is the same day.
So, yes. So I couldn't take the rapid test because they said they're less they're not as accurate. Yeah. So I had to take the 3 to 5. So if your results come back too early, you miss the window. If they come back too late, like I couldn't leave the airport in Puerto Rico until I showed them my negative results. Wow. So, I'm at the airport, and it's like some people are like being detained at the airport because they didn't know the restriction was still there. Because when Puerto Rico first opened, there was no restriction. And then they saw how the US was handling COVID, and they were like, y'all ain't coming down here with that. So they put the restriction in, which is crazy because they're part of the US, but our last president, different conversation. But anyway, so, I was talking to some people down there, and we started having a conversation about the shot, because if you had the shot, all you would have to do is show your COVID vaccine shot record, and there's no need for the test, right? So anyway, this prompted some conversations when I got back, and today we're going to talk about that a little bit more, because this is a conversation that's been brewing in our community for almost a year now, right? Before, the conversation was when the shot comes, and then whatever, I'm taking it, I'm not taking it, I'm looking at it, I'm not. Now the shot is here, right? So I was in Texas a little over a month ago, and Texas is fully open. Republican governor, they were like, we're open for business. And at that point, they had made the shots available to everybody, I think over 16. But here in Georgia, at the same time, it was like you had to be 50 or over. But now, from my understanding, everybody 16 and over is able to get the shots. So we went from what we were going to do when the shots got here to now they're here. And there's still a lot of indecisiveness with people figuring out what to do, because it's here. Mm-hmm. Like, it's available. So what are you going to do? So I want to have a conversation about that this morning. Again, a little bit of a pivot, but Montoya and I have had this conversation. Shay, we actually talked about this briefly on one of the shows last year. I think it was you, Will, and one or two other people. I think it was Wes. And the room at that time was nobody's taking it. Right. So since that time, I've done more research. I've had more conversations, and my position is shift. And guys, this is one of those things where this is for entertainment purposes only. We're not doctors. We're not scientists. We're just having a conversation. I ain't saying go out, get the shot. I'm not trying to convince anybody either way. We're just having a conversation. So let me ask you this, Shay, before I bring Montoya in. Again, the consensus in the room last year, October, November, whenever we did that live, was nobody's taking it. has your opinion or feeling on the shot changed since we've had that conversation?
So this is where I am. It may sound like I'm being funny, and I would assume that some people who are watching have said this as well. I'm like, you all get it. If you get it, I'll be fine. That's how I feel. Now, I love to travel. And so I'm aware that my travel is going to be, in question, depending on where it is that I want to go. So I have softened a bit because one of my clients, who is a medical doctor in Jackson, Mississippi, she and her husband are medical doctors. He definitely got the shot. He's over 65. She's much younger than him. She's in her 40s, and she got it as well. A very healthy woman. She's not one of those doctors who gives advice and then doesn't take her own.
Right.
She's very healthy, very active. And so she's like my open line that when I hear something or I have a question, we talk about it. And then I listen to her go through getting her shots. I recently got some information this morning that was kind of disturbing to me. Because it's one thing to hear things online, but it's another thing when you hear somebody that had a bad reaction or had something happen to them. It hits home in a sense. So I am going to talk to her about what came to me this morning from somebody very close. But I still don't really go out often. I do like necessity-based things, except for when I travel. So again, I've opened up or softened a bit, but I'm still in the mindset that I'm not getting it unless it's necessary, unless I have to.
So Montoya, I've heard you address that point in the past and listening to you on other radio shows and things like that. So I'll give you that in a minute. But Shay, yes, it is definitely going to affect travel. I think Carnival already said when they relaunch next year that unless you have the shot, the vaccination, you won't be able to travel on any of their cruises. So and then the conversation is about, some universities saying before the kids come back next year, they want to be vaccinated. So there's a lot of conversations on how this is going to happen, because again, it's going to divide. It's going to put another line in saying, like, if you want to do this, you're going to have to get it. So it's either going to be mandatory for you to do certain things, or I don't know. So Montoya, let's talk about, first of all, our community, right? Statistically, they're saying that it affects the Black community. The COVID-19 has affected the Black community more than other communities. More sickness, more hospitalizations, more deaths. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So unfortunately, it's still the current numbers. We're dying at about 2 times the rate of other groups. Only Native Americans are dying slightly higher than African Americans. So it's coming in about 1 in 1,100. So every 1,100 people, unfortunately there'll be a death. Just to obviously because they're the majority compared to whites, if you will. They're dying. Their death rate is like 1 in every 21. So it's pretty much absolutely, at about double. But as you mentioned, you didn't mention just the deaths, because anytime you see me on a broadcast, I don't like to focus on the deaths, right. 2 or 3, simply because it's less than 1% or right at 1%, we'll kind of look at that 1% as a small number. But unfortunately, there's 19% of people that will have lingering effects even after fighting COVID, or sometimes it causes people to have heart attacks. Like for every 1 death, there's 3 strokes. So while we're at 500,000 deaths, which to me is a high enough number to be concerned and not, I understood in the beginning, in the first, how people weren't able to put in context what the scientists were saying in the early beginnings. When we're only at 3,000 deaths around the country, I could see how people would just say, it's only 3,000 deaths, what's the problem? While the scientists the whole time were saying, because of the type of virus and how it spreads, here's the expected death rate. You know what I'm saying? So all I'm simply saying is, when it was 3,000, I get the skepticism of, is this thing really dangerous? We didn't anticipate that it would be 50,000. 500,000 in a year. You know what I'm saying? So that's a significant number, but a lot of people can't translate their initial feeling into that 500,000 is a big number, because if you thought, oh, it's only 3,000 now, you don't look at the 500,000 as a big number. But we don't have one thing that has killed that many people in 1 year. Like people sometimes will say something like, well, cancer kills more. But I say, well, what about one specific cancer? where
Right.
because it's one specific virus. So when I'm just saying, I'm trying to just give context and things of that nature. And so unfortunately, due to the higher death rate, due to the higher collateral damages, and of course, it was no denying that in the very beginning, no surprise that the pandemic unfortunately brought out how bad the medical community is to our community. So a lot of those higher death rates are related to the kind of the lack of care that we get, as well as our diets and how, well we eat and things of that nature. So the underlying conditions, no surprise that it was higher in our community. That's not blaming, that's a reality.
Right.
And so that speaks to a lot of things. And then obviously, I'll say this and turn it over back to you. And obviously, again, somebody that's been researching and following the science, and I, openly just put it out there, I'm an advocate for the vaccine. So let me say that off top. So what I'll say is, so when people heard the underlying conditions, you started hearing people really push for being healthy. And that still lacks context because this is a novel, meaning new virus. So getting healthy in the moment is a little too late once the virus is here.
Right.
And so I'm not saying don't get healthy. Like I went on video showing I take moringa, turmeric. I have a holistic thing that I do as a daily routine. You want your body functioning, but unfortunately, people have a bad assumption about what they can do to your immune system. Your immune system is not. It's what's the word I'm looking for? It's a reactionary system. Most of our systems are active systems. So the immune system, quote unquote, believe it or not, can't be boosted, for example.
Right.
It's only going to respond once there's some new entity in your body, and then it responds. So of course you want to be as healthy as you can be, have your body functioning properly, but there's nothing you can really do in advance. There's a new virus on the market, unfortunately, in the world, unfortunately. And the last thing I'll say in reference to the travel, it's not about our government put this in perspective. Other countries don't want Americans coming to their country based on how America handled it. So so the travel things with the passports, that ain't really got much to do with our country. Obviously, our government will say, make sure you have it because they can't give you the passport to go to those countries. But that's really those other countries saying, like Puerto Rico did, like you just mentioned, they don't even want us coming. So those are not even being pushed by our government. That's other countries realizing how serious it is and how careless our country was about it.
Exactly. So what I've seen is, again, safe place, sober people. You've seen a lot of other races fight against the mask mandate. Like you're taking away our freedoms or whatever. And we do know the last president did downplay the whole virus until the end. Right. So you saw his rallies with thousands of people with no mask, like, the whole thing is fake, fake news, whatever. So you had the one side where I say that was more arrogance than anything. Right. Then you had our side. I live not too far outside of the city of Atlanta. I'm always in the city. I've been to Houston and different places. And in our communities, I've seen the same recklessness with people not wearing masks as I've seen on the other side. Like I said, on that side, it was arrogance.
Right.
On our side, Montoya, would I be wrong in saying that's more ignorance, or I don't know?
I think it's a fair general assessment, and I think I always like when I use the word general, like humans talk in generalizations. So if you allow for the generalization, you can have a better conversation. So I think it is fair to say in general that is the difference. You could obviously go find people, in a sense, African Americans who felt just like the people you're kind of referring to. So nothing is across the board, and of course you're not saying that. But if you wanted to compare generally what was causing that difference in why people, in a sense, were not following, the suggested quote, I mean, it has, really, to be honest, we haven't been really mandated of anything from the government, which is what people are most concerned about. But obviously, the different restaurants and things have said, hey, this is our requirement now. The government has just been highly suggesting throughout this year. But of course, like you said, one side is afraid that the government is going to start mandating and taking freedoms to agree. And some African Americans feel that way as well. But yeah, ours has been, if you think about it in the very beginning, due to, for example, and it still hasn't hit the continent of Africa that well. And then initially, we didn't have even a lot of Black people when it was down to 3,000 and 10,000 deaths in the country. We didn't see a lot of Blacks who had it. So, the initial ignorance was somehow our bodies were not getting it. I'm just saying that kind of ran out there pretty early. Obviously, it got crushed when the real numbers kind of showed and more people got it. But I'm just saying, to me, that proves we kind of started, generally speaking, from a place of ignorance, and some of that ignorance has remained due to a lot of the misinformation that gets pushed, in my opinion, about the vaccines and stuff.
Nah, the misinformation is key. Yeah. Because I remember early on, melanated people can't get it. We all going to Africa, the sun, vitamin D, all these different conversations at the beginning, which, like you say, the numbers have, at least if you're willing to look at the numbers, have disproved a lot of that. And for me, it was strange because, like I said, I've traveled. I've been, to Texas back and forth throughout the pandemic because of family. I've been some other places, really cut my travel down, but it was the US. So I kind of expected to see masks and, opinions and different things like that. But when I went to Puerto Rico, even though, Puerto Rico is part of the US, it's not the mainland. It was my first time experiencing people dealing with COVID somewhere else. You know what I'm saying? So, like I said, from the airport, when you have to leave, they had the full hazmat suits on, taking people's papers to go out. And there was a very strong military presence there at the airport as well. Like, you weren't bolting out the airport. I mean, they were treating COVID like you bringing something serious over here. So the military presence, the hazmat suits. And then when I got, into San Juan, where I was staying, just seeing how serious they were taking it over there. Again, this was my first time experiencing out of the places I've been. They're taking it like there was a curfew, like 10 o'clock, everything's shutting down. People were wearing masks on the streets, and I didn't know if that was a mandate, but I shared with y'all there was such a heavy police presence over there, I wasn't going to risk it. So I'm walking down the street in 90-degree heat in Puerto Rico with a mask on. I don't understand Spanish, and I ain't trying to get pulled over by a cop saying, and I'm like, you know what? This is different.
Hey, so when in Rome, do as the Romans do, man.
Yeah, so I'm like, I can't imagine like going like to other countries where, like you say, they're like, y'all ain't coming over here, because I blended in fairly well in Puerto Rico. Right, there's a lot of Black people over there. But if I went to China or somewhere else, we heard early on talking about disproving stuff. There was a McDonald's in China that wasn't letting Black people in because they were saying they were responsible for the coronavirus. Like, early on, there was a story about that over there. So I was like, I can't imagine going somewhere where I would be the standout, having to deal with this. It was just different for me.
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention that. Yeah, two of the countries that I have on, I guess I watched to see what is their thinking about letting us in. Martinique and Guadeloupe, those are French-speaking countries, but they're Black countries. Like you said, we're not really a standout there, but we talked to people who live there, and they're like, no, we don't want you. We don't want you.
Yeah.
Stay in America. I don't want to get into this too much, but I can't help but ask. I respect both of your opinions, and I don't know, somebody else might be thinking the same thing. In general, if you could just put somewhat of a blanket on it, what do you think is the difference between the way we respond or not respond here in the US versus some of those places that are much more restrictive, much more cautionary? What's the tea? Like, why is that how we operate here?
No, absolutely. It's culture. It's culture. Like, to a degree, see, even the way that you use the term restrictive, in those cultures, they don't, even hear it that way. And part of it, it varies throughout different governments around the world. Like some governments are real restrictive, right? So if you are a part of a restrictive government, even that becomes normal to a degree, right? So if that government says you're gonna do this, since you're used to that, it don't even feel like a restriction, right? But there's other countries where we wouldn't say the government's much different than American government as far as the type of government they have, right? But in those cultures, if the culture is naturally to look out for one another, so it doesn't even feel like restriction. Hey, here's a safety measure that ensures others are okay. So again, getting away from maybe the socialist governments, if you will, right? So in some other countries that are democratic, just like us, in those countries, if their culture is more familiar versus the American individualism or rugged, what is called American rugged individualism. Yeah, which is a part of our culture. So that's the difference. And I'll say one thing, one other thing, I'll turn over to T. I'm gonna tell you again, I like researching, I like getting people the right information. That's what we do with Mental Dialogue. So I started researching pretty much early on, very early when it came to this thing was happening, right? And I'm intrigued by science too. So, kind of a nerd like that. But that aside, here's the moment when I took it extremely serious. I'm talking about in the beginning when our government wasn't already telling us all of the information, right? While I was seeing what the scientists were saying, I was looking at all that information. I was like, I don't think at the time, it's about what they were putting out publicly. I'm like, why are they not just telling us how serious this is? Like, and that's just me going by what I was seeing scientists around the world saying this is prior to the lockdown in April for me, just looking this information up. But here's the moment when I realized this is more serious than even what I'm reading with the scientists. I was in the Air Force for 6 years, and so I got a lot of friends that stayed in and that kind of thing. And so I got this one friend that's like a colonel in the Air Force, and I was an officer in the Air Force. So typically at bases, if sometimes certain things will happen and they'll kind of lock down the base. But usually when they lock down the base, it never affects officers. Like, I'm just telling you how it typically works, right? Or whatever. Well, I had a friend who was a colonel, and they got locked down, and it included him. And he put a personal Facebook post saying, this thing is very serious. I want to be able to go see my grandmother again. And he was basically putting out a personal post saying, please take this serious. Don't be as cavalier as you're being. Because the briefing they got on the base, because, America ain't gonna let their soldiers get messed up. That's one thing I was kind of saying the whole time, like, y'all ain't taking this thing serious, but this is how the military is being treated right now, right? So ultimately, what they got told in the briefing was, and they locked the officers down too, and they literally said, because of our culture, we're locking you all down because we know we will do what we're supposed to. Y'all have to stay or whatever. But because of American culture, we know the culture are not going to take to this. So they locked the officers down too. At that moment, I knew everything I was reading outside of the States as far as the information. This thing is realer than anybody wanted to, and again, we're 100 years removed from ever experiencing a pandemic. So sometimes, not having even experienced it adds to your ignorance, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think early on, a lot of other countries took it a lot more serious than the U.S. I mean, we've heard the leak tape of Trump early on admitting that he knew how serious it was and saying he was trying to
downplay it.
Yeah, downplay it, not scare people, whatever. So other countries were having these same conversations. They just moved differently. Like they put things in play early on where we didn't really start having serious that conversation he had, I think, was like in February of last year. We didn't really start having serious conversations about, lockdowns and things till months later.
2 months later.
So for those months, we're running around like it's the flu. It's a variation of the flu. It ain't affecting us, blah, blah, blah. It's still over in China. We only got 3,000 cases, where all the while we're just spreading this like wildfire, right? So I think them taking the information and acting quicker played a huge difference in what we're seeing today.
Of course.
So, that's why we're seeing the lockdowns from other countries saying no, the U.S. And the thing with Biden is, early on in his campaign, he talked about lockdown, but he got so much pushback from it at this point, he's tried to leave it to the individual states and, certain, industries and things like that, because we had been so free, it would have been very tough for him to come and just lock everything down.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, that would have hurt him, in his first term, very drastically. So, now I think we're in this space where we're trying to figure it out and letting people be responsible without having those mandates. But, I think watching how many people decide to take the vaccine is going to play a big part in what comes next, because our community, people were like, well, they're trying to kill us. That's why they pushing, these campaigns so hard in our community. No, our community is very weary when it comes to what the medical field is trying to do with us, vaccines and trials and different things. So, in my opinion, they weren't pushing it because there was nothing foul going on. Is they knew, to Shay's point, what you said earlier is, I'm gonna let everybody else get vaccinated, and hopefully that will prevent me from having to deal with, and I don't want to misquote you, Shay, but early on you were like, you gonna let them do it, you ain't gonna do it. A lot of us felt that way.
And yeah, and I didn't even necessarily mean, from the standpoint of African Americans or Black people or whomever. Just in my mind, the way I operate, the way I move on a day-to-day basis, the fact that I really don't interact with many people at all. I attempt to do, even before this, I attempted to do everything I could virtually, if it made sense. So for me, I have apprehension because of how quickly we're being put in a position to have to take the vaccine, or when I say have to take it, I'm just saying, if you have certain pre-existing conditions, or if you're someone who is out and about, or you're regularly around tons of people, if that was my life, I probably would have a much different stance. But if I can wait a little bit longer, just as more data is collected and more individuals are getting the vaccine, it may make me feel even more comfortable than I feel, now.
So your conversation, which I expect, is different from a lot of the conspiracy theorists that I talk to sometimes, right? So fear is a hell of a thing. But what I found out, like we said today, we went from the vaccine is coming to it's here. So I understand the conversation when the vaccine was coming, So one of the things about conspiracy theorists, sometimes the hole never ends, right? You can never give them enough info to get them to change their mind. And more importantly, some of them, again, being general, don't even look for themselves. It's all based on emotion. This is what they did to us back then. I don't trust the government, blah, 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 whatever. So your conversation, I think, is a little different because you actually have done some research and formulated opinion, and I'm not just moved by emotion. Montoya, I've seen you, on some shows where you were dropping facts, statistics, scientific proof, and people were so moved by their emotion, they weren't even willing to listen. Because again, if you're a conspiracy theorist, how deep does that hole get? If I'm now you're saying the scientists are in on it. Now you're saying that, the trials they've done are fake, and, this, that, or whatever. So I don't want to put your business out there, but you just had an experience.
Yeah.
So
it's no problem.
Okay. So you just caught COVID yourself.
Right.
And to Shay's point, I know you've been very careful. You mask up, you work with kids, but there was one particular.
I definitely, I was loose, we were able to pinpoint due to the other people around me that got it. So we were able to pinpoint when I actually got it. Which I guess kind of got lucky to speak to that, but it was definitely a day that I was being careless, if you will. So because I work with, like you said, because I do after school program, so I obviously have a requirement where we're masked up throughout the time, we're at school and things of that nature. So my routine, like most people, especially with COVID and stuff like that, my routine is pretty solid. So the only person I would be around was my best friend without a mask, right? And he never goes anywhere. So his routine is more solid than anybody's, right? He don't go anywhere. He's, kind of like Shay, if you will, to that degree or whatever. Plus, he works from home, so he doesn't even have to go anywhere, right? And so anyway, so he's the only person I would ever hang out with. But we got loose. We had a friend come in town, and to add to it, the friend comes in town, spends 3-4 days at a wedding. Now they were masking up at the wedding, from what I understand, but he's also coming from Texas, hot spot, comes in at a wedding, for a few days, and then he decides we're gonna hang out. So we hang out in the studio. None of us mask up, brought food, whatever. Me and my best friend are used to not masking up, so it doesn't cross our mind between he and I, because again, we've been doing that for all year. But again, we got the same routine. But it was lackadaisical to let our friend come into town who he ain't wearing a mask, and it was 5 of us in the studio, and 3 of us caught it. So we do assume that he brought it to us. Don't know for a fact, you know what I mean? But 3 of us got it. I ended up, unfortunately, because my symptoms were so minor and I didn't show the fever the first week, because typically the fever is the first thing that shows. That's why everybody does that fever check, because it's usually one of the first indicators that you might have it, right? So the first week I showed no fever. I had some symptoms, so I thought I just had maybe a slight flu or maybe a cold. So I'm go to work the first week. I unfortunately give it to the only coworker that I ever get close to at work, because we stay separated the whole time at work. But when we initially eat, we separate in the gym, and so we still wear masks, but we unmask to eat at the very beginning of the program. So I assume that's when I may have given it to her. Mm-hmm. And so she got it. She's younger than me, and her fiance. And unfortunately, they just experienced harder symptoms than I did. I was fortunate that my symptoms were minimal or whatever. And but yeah, so being that lackadaisical that one time, we got burned.
Yeah. So you're a science guy, right?
I love science. Yeah, I love getting into it.
And I love the way that you explain science. Science ain't about being right.
Nah.
You know what I'm saying? They don't move the needle just so they can say they're right. They're about proving the truth, right? So we hear now people are saying, okay, well, maybe I'll take the shot. But then now people are saying, oh, well, the vaccine ain't going to work, because now they're saying you may have to get it every 6 months. And now they're saying that there's another variant of the virus. Now they stop with Johnson.
And that's also we didn't want this for, and we haven't even highlighted what happened with the Johnson & Johnson being on hold right now.
That's what I was just about to say. They just pulled Johnson.
Okay, cool.
Johnson.
Yeah, we got to highlight that right now.
We had people now considering it, but now the conspiracy theorists are doubling down.
Of course, they get to.
No, this ain't even gonna work. Why are you going, put yourself in that situation that don't work? Look at Johnson & Johnson. They got blood clots. So how you being the science guy, we need to keep having these conversations with people that are willing to at least listen. What do you say to that as a science guy about how we may have to get it every 6 months? Johnson & Johnson for blood clots. Let's have that conversation.
No, absolutely. So again, I could just kind of lay out the information from a scientific standpoint. Let me sneak this in here real quick. And to be fair to our community, I had Laditra White, who did a vaccine project on the radio show, and I wanted to highlight that the way Shay feels, to be honest, is the majority of how most of our community feels. Right, so most of our community is not caught up in the conspiracy theory. Unfortunately, the reason those people are highlighted, though, is a lot of the stuff they put out adds to the hesitancy, even though, like, for example, Shay doesn't talk about the things they talk about, but some of the hesitancy that's out there still gets driven by every question that they ask or whatever. Because like you pointed out, you said going down that hole, but I've been on several shows talking about this, and I always tell people who are skeptical, I was like, if there's anybody that should be skeptical, it's absolutely Black people. Like we absolutely have the right to be skeptical, but I always challenge those who are over the top skeptical and maybe agree to some of the conspiracy. I always say, can you take it one step further? Your question is valid. I said the only reason I can tell you this scientific answer is because I asked the same question you asked. I say take it a step further and go see what the answer is. When you're skeptical, the question alone will stop you. You'll be like, how did they make it so quick? And you're done. Like, how did they make, when I'm just saying that fear like, because this is obviously one of the fast, this is where they broke the record for the vaccine coming to market, if you will, right? And so that's a valid question to say, hey, I don't trust it because it's too soon. That's a very valid question. But I challenge those who are skeptical, go at least look at the answer. Now, you can still have an opinion after you look at the answer, but to not even go look for the answer and stop at the question, that's why your rabbit hole can always exist. You're never going to look for an answer to your own question. Now, back to answering what's going on currently from a scientific standpoint. So let me start with Johnson & Johnson, because I just did a video on this yesterday. Again, just trying to update people. So as you said, people mistakenly think science is trying to be right, like we as humans, when we dialogue, are trying to be right. Science by nature is counterintuitive. And so to understand the scientific process and methodology, science actually does all of its methodology basically to disprove. Like, that's what the testing and stuff is for at all times. It's only when they get to the point that they can't disprove it that they will say, hey, we got something here.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? Or as they keep, or eventually they start saying we may have something here, because they're getting to the point where they're not able to disprove, is this actually doing what it says? So I like to point out the counterintuitive so that people will understand it's not about trusting science being right or wrong, and understand that typically scientists sometimes can make mistakes. That's why the methodology corrects it when they make mistakes. You can even have people who are using science incorrectly. We know that's happened in history, so that's where our skepticism comes from. What I like to highlight is, like, for example, let's just point this out specifically for our community. Like in the early 1900s, this country had a whole office dedicated to studying eugenics and our inferiority. Like, that was a taxpayer office in the early 1900s. That's how far gone the false premise of our inferiority existed in this country. Obviously, the country was openly racist still coming out of the Civil War, right? So there's a whole office dedicated to it. And so when you're skeptical and knowing that our country has done that, you may not have heard, what I'm telling you now, but if you're hearing this for the first time, you'll go, see, I get it. And you're supposed to feel that way. But the reason we know that we're not inferior is because correct science never agreed with anything that office put out, if that makes sense. So even with bad intentions, when methodology is done correctly, their studies can't hold up to actual studies. They can't hold, like, anything that came out of that office, whatever came out of that office, because they started with a false premise. So there was never going to be a study that would hold up to an actual scientific study to so-called prove the information they were putting out, saying that we were inferior. Again, I'm just trying to bring some context to how science works.
Right.
So even when someone's intentionally wrong, they may have the money to spread that information. Again, I'm just trying to break down how we rightfully have reasons to be skeptical. However, when I break down, here's the science, I don't want people just to dismiss it, because it's the process that ultimately protects us, not the humans that are doing it, but the scientific process is done the same way all the time. So what happens is, if I do a research and I make a mistake, somebody else checking it, that's how they figure out I made a mistake, because I made some type of mistake in the process. All right, I always like to give that preference. So here's what's going on with Johnson & Johnson. So absolutely, you're right. It adds to the skepticism because, one of the vaccines is shut down, because here's the numbers just to share it. There were 6 people that on the VAERS report, you probably may have heard of that, the VAERS report, which is the Vaccine Adverse Effects Report or whatever. And so the CDC puts that out. So the VAERS report, there were 6 people that got the specific blood clot, and that's what the CDC scientists and the FDA scientists says, you know what, let's go check to make sure the vaccine is not causing it.
So
right?
hold on one second. You said 6 people.
Yeah, 6 people.
Right. So do we have an idea of how many people have been given that vaccine?
I'm about to tell you that now. That's exactly where I'm going. So
right.
Johnson & Johnson specifically is giving out 7 million doses, 7 million doses in the country, and 6 have developed this potential blood clot, right? So when you're fearful, your question goes, you just go, see, and there you're done. Here's the reality. So the VAERS report, I explained this on another video I did just yesterday. So the VAERS report, like conspiracy theorists what they'll say is, like, for example, there are deaths on the VAERS report. If you go to the CDC, you might, I ain't looked at it in like 2 months. So I think the last time I saw it was like 1,500 or 1,600 deaths or something like that, right? On the VAERS report. So it's probably higher now 2 months later. But the conspiracy or the anti-vaxxers, they'll go, the CDC's reporting, even the CDC's reporting 1,600 deaths. Like they'll say that. That's not how the VAERS report works. And this is how all medicine is rolled out. Any medicine that goes on the market, any adverse effect that anybody gets after they've taken that medicine, in this case, the vaccine, it goes on the report. It's not saying that it's causal, but they monitor everything that happens because they want to monitor. It says, hey, if something's kind of high, we might need to now go, it helps them go pinpoint and check, is this new medicine, is this new vaccine the reason that this is higher than normal? I would offer that with these blood clots, which is 6 people, right? And I'm not trying to minimize the number. Mm-hmm. I'm just highlighting that, and here's where my opinion comes in. My opinion, the reason they're even checking with only 6 people is because they're very aware of the hesitancy that exists. So they're going, in my opinion, over the top to shut down the entire vaccine of Johnson & Johnson until they find out. And unfortunately, let me highlight this because conspiracy theorists, people love to say it, but the science doesn't hide anything. One of those, like one woman died. One woman's died from this blood clots. So I'm saying this is because here's how the conspiracy people will tell us. They'll be like, one lady's died. They're getting the information from the scientists. And what my point being is, everything I'm telling you, science puts it out. If there was some type of conspiracy, we would have to go dig this information out because somebody on the inside is telling us, hey, there's a lady that died. This is all out in the open. I'm pointing it out because science isn't trying to be right. The science is reporting everything. And so now what they're doing is they're going to figure out if this thing is actually causing the blood clots. AstraZeneca, which is another vaccine outside of the United States, already been through this. Mm-hmm. They got shut down in different countries. They did the studies and said it's not related, and AstraZeneca has come back on the market. They changed the name. Again, they're in the business of making money too. They changed the name of it. So that change of name to the conspiracy theory is like, see, look how they're trying to get you. And they're just very aware that name is mud after they're having to stop it. So they're like, if we keep calling it that, people are going to keep thinking something's wrong with this vaccine. They're not naive to that.
Right.
I'm just pointing out that's what they did. And I'm not saying you're wrong for thinking there's something wrong with that. But I'm just pointing out the other side of it is reasonable too. So I'm just saying you don't have to believe what I'm saying, but you can't act like that is not reasonable. We can still disagree with. Go ahead.
You made a good point when you talked about the business side of it. Like if you look at any top earnings report, pharmaceutical companies on the top. So, again, conversations with people is, the government's giving them all this money, to pump these vaccines out. These companies were good before this happened. And if you think about it, a lot of these companies have been around for decades. So they don't want the bad press of even 1 or 2 people dying, because at the end of the day, for them, it's a business. They're businesses. So, them getting in bed with the government to actively kill people from a business perspective just doesn't make sense. You don't want to be a Pfizer or AstraZeneca or Johnson & Johnson after building, profitable companies for all these years and have people dying on your watch on your product. Johnson & Johnson already went through that with the lawsuit that they dealt with years ago. So, again, if we just pay a little bit of sense and use a little bit of common sense, some of the stuff just doesn't add up. So there's a question. Armida says, do you really believe that we're getting facts about the side effects? I've had friends who have had massive side effects, paralyzed for a number of days, and still have effects that they don't know how to treat. Are there certain pharmaceutical companies, vaccines going to certain communities? That was another conversation. They pumping a different vaccine into the Black community, or are they randomly being given? Montreal, I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were to go to see the VAERS report, they're not hiding anything. There's and I'm not always good with the scientific terms, but one of the major issues, one of the worst adverse effects, is similar to what she just said. I think there's a name. I think the name is aphilization or something like that. What she's talking about, the people that were paralyzed, like the example she gave. So, Amita, when you say, are they giving us the facts? Like, I know about it because it's out there. Like, so what I'm saying is, so the example she just gave, yes, those people are on the reports. So it's nothing being hidden in reference to the fact that there are people that have had some real adverse effects. What I'll say to you is, and understand this. So what happens is, for example, anytime you become hyper focused on anything that bad seems more alarming.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've said this on other broadcasts. Aspirin kills 6,000 people a year in the country. We don't know of any people that have died from vaccines personally. We don't really know anybody that's died from aspirin, because 6,000 people ain't a lot of people. But I'm just saying, if we were to be hyper focused on aspirin and somebody tell you it kills 6,000 people, everybody would stop taking aspirin right now. So it's not to suggest that the adverse effects are not there. Nobody's saying they don't exist. Any outside entity that enters your body, there is always a risk of side effects. I will tell you, in comparison to all other medicines, the vaccine profiles have the least amount of side effects compared to any other medicine in the entire pharmaceutical industry. Their profiles are much smaller than aspirin, than any other medicine that you might get from the doctor. Their profiles are much smaller.
Now, Montoya, when you were talking about the medical term, you're trying to get that out. Were you referring to atrial fibrillation?
I think that might be it. That's the one that's like a real bad side effect that's happening to some people, right? Is that the one that's
abnormal heart rhythm characterized by rapid and irregular beating? My mother had COVID, and we dealt with that, so I know what that is like. So it sounds like what you're describing.
Exactly. So that Amita, that answers your question. They didn't hide that people got that,
right?
Because they're studying those people. Because there's one condition that they always look out for, because there's this one condition called immunization something, right? Immunization is in the name of it. It's some type of genetic thing. So those are the only people, based on the history of all the other vaccines we have, because for the most part, your children are going to get 16 vaccines from age 0 to 18, right? 16 different vaccines. It'll be like 70 something shots, but it's 16 different ones that are on the schedule right now, right? But they right now, with the vaccine history, there's just one predisposed genetic condition they look out for. It's because vaccine deaths are extremely rare. They found when they happen, they found this one predisposed condition. So when somebody has that, they do have to take some precautions on how they give them the vaccine, and they already have procedures to ensure that doesn't happen. But those are the only people that they know that vaccines that might have that reaction because of this predisposed genetic condition. They got a name for it or whatever. But outside of that, vaccine deaths are extreme. They are extremely low.
Yeah, and this conversation has been the conversation I'm having with people is interesting, because, you know, in our industry, when selling life insurance, you get people's medical history, right? So you find out every pill they're taking before you go to underwriting. And, you know, Amita, Shay, you can contest to this. It's strange how many times I'll pick up a pill bottle and say, what are you taking these for? And they have no idea.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
The doctor gave it to me. I take it twice a day. But then on the other side of the coin, we're having this conversation about the vaccine, and there's so much scrutiny on it. So it's very interesting, you know, now that I'm sitting back thinking about how many people I deal with in our community on a regular day that don't even know what the hell they're taking. They bring out bags, Ziploc bags or pill boxes, and half of the stuff in there, they have no clue to what it is, but they take it religiously every day. But then on the other side, where, you know, we're having this conversation, like you say, Montoya, we get hyper focused on things sometimes, and I think that kind of skews the perspective. So, you know, just something I was thinking about when I was looking at Armina's question there, because the side effects, you know, I'm always on my mother, who just retired, just got a new doctor, and I'm like, we need to, you know, figure out like what the real side effects, because she had an incident last year where she got really sick, and we found out it was a side effect of the pill that she had never paid attention to. So, you know, how many of us have medicine cabinets full of pills that have 10 side effects that we don't pay attention to? Look at any, like to your point, Montoya, look at any commercial on TV that talks about a medication, and the last 10 seconds is side effects.
Right.
Like some of the most popular ones. You know,
they legally have to say it on commercials. That is a legal requirement.
So I'm just saying, you know, I was just thinking that it's very interesting to have the two sides of the coin, you know, in the same way. But thank you for that. Amita, she said, what are the stats on that? I don't know what on that was, Amita. I'm sorry, I don't know where you typed that, so I don't know exactly what you
she might just be asking about where can she see how many people's had that condition, is my assumption, just based on her question. Just go to the cdc.org, I think it's org, right? Government things are org, right?
Yeah.
cdc.org. Yeah, gov. Yeah, the gov. You're right. And then look up the BAER VAERS report, and you'll see everything that they're reporting around the country or whatever. But that condition is definitely one that's one of the most concerning ones, because it's one of the worst side effects. And so again, it's just a report where they know about it. They openly talk about it. You can look up, you just like if you find a name to it, Amita, you can just look it up and you'll see bunches of information. So there's the scientists. Here's another thought. The idea of them hiding it, like the idea that they even stopped Johnson & Johnson, is just proof of the process doing what it does. So if there's if there's this concept of hiding, then it makes it harder for them to know or keep in control of what they're doing. If there's these studies that are being done hidden, the scientific community puts their studies out because they need peer review to confirm what they saw. Because if you're the first scientist to put it out, you're gonna get the most money.
Right.
So I need to put it out. Like, for example, here's something that didn't exist 15 years ago. Like now in the scientific community, they have a computer they all use that all of them can see at one time. So for example, when the scientists in Wuhan first sequenced the coronavirus genome, the day they sequenced it, they uploaded it to the computer, and every scientist in the world, if they went to their computer, could see that the same day. 20 years ago, no way this vaccine could come together this quick, because they would spend another year passing it around each other through sending the reports around. Every scientist in the world could, like the guy that developed the Moderna one, which was the one that was the fastest, like the fact that he could see the genome sequencing the same day that the guys put it out starts the clock. You couldn't do that 20 years ago.
I will say, Montoya, that's one of the conversations I had with the young lady I was talking about, my client who's a medical doctor and got the vaccine. That was one of the first conversations that we had, and it was kind of her moment to kind of open me up, and it did. So I'm good. I'm glad to hear you sharing that right now, because I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, and I'll even add to that, that same guy's name is Barney Graham, a scientist or whatever, out of Texas. He had been working on the actual vaccine since the Zika virus, which was 9 years earlier. So they basically had a 9-year head start on a vaccine of this nature, because the Zika virus was another coronavirus. They did get it. I think at the time they broke the record. They got the first clinical trial shot in arm in 7 months, but they got the Zika virus under control. So there's no need to go along with human trials if they pretty much got under control and it's not spreading anymore. So there was no need to finish the human trials. With this one, we obviously didn't get under control because of the 14-day asymptomatic period. So even just highlighting that, again, going back to some very old videos, the reason the coronavirus ended up being so different than some of the other ones, even though we got some fears, right? The scares, Ebola, Zika, the Nile virus, all these different ones we've heard about over the years. The thing that made this one so different, I got this from Neil deGrasse, basically just saying, due to the asymptomatic period, there's no way to know where it's at.
Right.
Whereas, like, for example, Ebola, which was a much more deadlier than the coronavirus, as soon as you got it, you got symptoms. So at that moment, the scientists can quarantine you quickly. But if all three of us are asymptomatic with coronavirus, they're not quarantined us, especially when they're not even familiar with the virus yet. So that's how it spread so quickly. Neil deGrasse said once they figured out that it was airborne and asymptomatic, he said all of us knew at that point this is going to be our first world. He said they knew immediately because of those two factors. He says because if we don't know who has it, we have no chance of stopping the spread. And I figured, I got that from Neil deGrasse in January of last year. So that's why I was tripping off of what our government was talking about. Oh, it's over in China. I'm like, huh? And scientists are telling they know this is going to be a pandemic. Why are we saying this is only in China right now? I didn't understand that because I'm like, why are we listening to politicians versus the scientists who this is their life? It didn't make a lot of sense to me, but governments do what the governments do.
Yeah. So we're coming up on an hour, and Shay and I said this may be a conversation that dominates the show, and I'm happy it did because I really feel this is good info. I've heard Montoya having these conversations, for months now, being an advocate and being transparent with his own experience. So I want to shift gears a little bit here and talk about industry effect, right? So we've seen carriers change the way they deal with people that had corona. Montoya just said he had it. So if he needed life insurance right now, I wouldn't be able to write him for at least 6 months, depending on how the effects are. He shared earlier that even though his symptoms are gone, now he's having some body aches and different things that persist. So we still don't know what the long term on this is going to look like for people that had it. So we're expecting more changes in the industry to come down on how we deal with it and underwriting and different things like that. But one thing that he said to me yesterday was interesting that I completely wasn't even thinking about was activating his disability policy, right? Because of his situation working with kids, he had to take some time off. And if he didn't get that negative result back, he would have had to take more time off, which is trigger him to say, hey, I got this policy. Let me go and see what this is about. So, we're out there, talking to people on a regular basis, having different conversations. Let's just make sure that we're looking at the whole picture again. Some of us are just straight, insurance guys. All we do is sell life. But our portfolio as independent agents allows us to be more flexible than some other people in the industry. So let's make sure, we're looking at the whole picture and having, the right conversation. The reason I love having, Montoya in this platform is in our community, a lot of times the agent becomes more than just an agent. We can talk about fiduciary responsibility and all that. But I mean, I've shared before, I can't tell you how many grandmothers have tried to hook me up with their daughters or invited me over for dinner, or some of them wanted to keep me for themselves, but different conversation. But
I'm lying. No, just joking.
But hey, never mind. But
go ahead.
What I'm saying is sometimes we end up having conversations with them that nobody else has. Right. And they look to us sometimes for information. And because of that relationship, we're able to have those conversations. So, what I'm saying is let's just slow down a little bit and make sure we're having those conversations, because that's the point of building the relationship. They may have the kid that's just a conspiracy theorist and mama, you better not get that shot. You know what I'm saying? Or they just may not know. I just went through it with my mother personally. Like I said, she just retired, moved to Texas. Texas was hot. My nephews over there go to school. They're in public school, and we were concerned about them coming home, giving, my mother something. So we had to have a real conversation about, is it time to really investigate what this shot can do for you? And after she did her research, talked to her doctors, she went ahead and got hers. And she's been fine. This has been about a month. She had a little soreness at the beginning, but again, just having the conversations that sometimes are uncomfortable. Go ahead, Montoya.
And highlighting the disability, if you're not getting the shot, you definitely should have disability insurance. Let me just throw that out there. And a lot of people haven't even heard of disability insurance, but it's relatively cheap. And, again, obviously y'all are the experts here, so y'all can kind of go more into it. But I always like to explain how it was explained to me, because I hadn't heard of it, and I got that later. I've always had my life insurance since I was in my 20s, but I got the disability later in my later 20s because I didn't know about one. I didn't know about it, and two, I've seen somebody not be able to access their full insurance, but had they had disability insurance, they might have been okay with what they were going through. But yeah, especially with COVID, and again, you might be in the 80%. There's no asymptomatic to low symptoms like me. 80%, that's how they experience COVID. But unfortunately, there is 19% that will go to the hospital, or even if they don't go to the hospital, they will experience lingering permanent damage that could affect how you work. So you may not just get the 10 or 14 days. That's what happened to me. Because I had a positive longer, I got longer than 14 days away from my job. So disability helps supplement you until you return to work, because what happens is people get their life insurance, but they never think about if they're incapacitated, not able to work. You're not dead, so you can't, they got living benefits now, so hopefully that's part of it. I don't know how that works. I'll shut up and kind of let y'all talk, but I still think I'm glad disability is something that somebody taught me to get years ago, and I wish more people would take advantage.
Definitely a necessity to have in your healthcare life insurance portfolio. Definitely something that we need to have more of a conversation about, and I think this conversation will prompt that. Two quick pieces of industry news for people that are looking for healthcare. The healthcare open enrollment has been extended. The marketplace now is going to be open to August. It was supposed to end in March. They extended it to the end of April now, being told it's to the end of August. So if you don't have your healthcare now, you still have an opportunity outside of the special election period to get it. And Shay, you said there's also been some movement on the Medicare side, correct?
Right. So the special election period called open enrollment just ended on the 31st of March. However, because we had some weather related issues here in the state of Georgia and several other states, you can actually, if you work in the Medicare space, or if you have family who is on Medicare and they need to make some changes, the special election for Georgia specifically has been extended until the 25th of this month, until the 25th of April. So you really want to visit a FEMA website and look at that, because a lot of the different companies are marketing the SEP or special election period. But for your particular state, you can go to the FEMA website and find out when that special election period ends.
Okay. All right. Well, hey, Montoya, again, really appreciate having you on. You guys know this won't be the last time y'all see Montoya, and you know why. These are always very enriching conversations. I've shared this before. When I'm doing studies on these stats, Montoya is the guy I go to, and now you see why. This brother has a wealth of knowledge, and I appreciate him. Always willing to come and share with our community. So, thank you again, brother.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, thank both of you.
Yeah. And before we sign off, family, we really need you all to go ahead and check out that survey. And go ahead and give us your ideas, your feedback, who you are. It's really rare when you have people in front of you, or you're part of groups, if you will, that are looking to serve you. Most times people are asking you to, do something for them or buy something from them. In this scenario, we're asking that you fill that out so we can be on point when it comes to giving you industry based, what you want, what you need. So take advantage of that. Thank you to those of you who have filled it out. It's important. And two things I wanted to leave you with. Montoya touched on it earlier, but it fit. This came up for me this morning. Trust the process. Don't, necessarily jump to conclusions. Do your due diligence, do your research, but at the same time, be patient and trust the process. So thank you again for being on, and thank you all for listening. And don't forget the survey.
Yeah, the survey is on the page, and we've also sent it to some of you all individually that we could by tagging you. So again, thanks for joining. You guys know how we always end. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Hopefully you choose to go together. And I'm going to get off here because Shay has brought my value down by challenging me with my women. So we're going to have an off off-camera conversation. But check y'all out next week. Thanks again. Later.
Hey, next every Saturday, the Mental Dialogue Talk Show, 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Got a brother by the name of Quasi Black is my guest for a conversation with smart people. This brother, former gang member, been shot a couple times. Now him and his wife live in France, and they are able to avoid all the type of things that we're experiencing right now in America. And he loves talking about not experiencing the things that we experience as African Americans. And so he's able to kind of go from that to what he's doing now. Great conversation on Saturday.
Do me a favor, post that on the wall, Monterey.
Well, in the chat, or how do I do? Oh, you on the show?
Wall, on the
I will. Definitely.
All right, appreciate it. Check y'all out next week.
All right, thank you.